Hello beautiful people and welcome. Hi to a video on the new Sumeru Chronicled Wish. And should you pull on the Chronicled Wish? No. Hope you enjoyed, hope you learned a thing or two, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye YouTube. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's not looking hot for most of these characters. Let's quickly go through them. Tighnari. Tighnari is one of those characters that I think often gets heavily overestimated. He does not do a lot of damage. Even in teams that do focus on his personal damage, he's rarely above like 30% of the team's DPS. His numbers are just not very good. Tighnari is a character who is focused on spread reactions, but doesn't actually have any EM scaling in his kit. Right? He has a stat buff based on his EM, so I guess that's an indirect EM scaling, but he doesn't have any direct EM scaling in his kit. If you look at the numbers on everything, it's all attack, attack, attack on everything. And that means that his scaling is basically split, and his numbers are not good enough to make that split scaling actually good. So that is balanced around his application, but he's balanced at a level of, well, Sumeru, pre-Nahida Sumeru too, when the ceiling for your team DPS was like 80-90k, and he was a standard character that wasn't supposed to be that strong in the meta back then. As a standard character, you have the ability of obtaining more copies of him through losing your 50/50s, through the standard character selector every year, and through the relatively new Constellation Selector event. Tighnari's constellations are very good, but the main thing they do is they increase his personal damage, and, well, really, it's not his constellations that are very good, it's just his C6. His constellations on the way to C6 are pretty ass. Like, they're not completely awful for a standard character, but you can tell he's a standard character from them. And his C6 isn't enough to make up for that, really. And that creates a scenario where, like, at C6, Tighnari he's an okay character. In the current meta, a C6 Tighnari is not really better than a Natlan carry. Pretty equivalent, more or less, to a Natlan carry. Not Mawika. He's okay, but yeah, it's not that great. I don't think he's a character that, if you're focused on the meta in any way, shape, or form, you should ever get on the Chronicled Wish, because you can get him from standard and you can eventually C6 him from Constellation Selector if you want. So spending Primogems on him just feels kind of like a suboptimal idea. Let's put it that way. His weapon is okay. It actually gives him the EM scaling that his kit doesn't have to begin with, and it's a pretty good weapon for him. So since it's not a weapon that's available on standard, if you're someone who really likes Tighnari and who is planning on getting C6 Tighnari eventually from the selectors, you could consider getting his weapon. But honestly, it's not even that big of an upgrade if you already have another 5-star stat stick, because unfortunately, the Sumeru time signature weapons just were not the greatest. Overall, stay away. Next is Dehya. Dehya sucks ass, man. Back when she was released, I compared C6 Dehya to Dragon's Bane Hu Tao. Yeah, yep. Dehya has received a little bit more support since in her optimal teams, but not much, and she's still not very good. Weak characters can get wheelchaired a lot more because of the stronger support cores, namely with Inefa. And that's something you can do with Tighnari as well, by the way. But it's not Dehya putting in the work. Outside of trying to play her as a carry, she is an acceptable defensive utility option in a few teams. With Llama's release, Neuvillette Hyperbloom is back in business, and for people who don't have Farina or who want to use Farina somewhere else, you've got a few options for your last slot, and Dehya is one of those options, although not my favorite one because of her pretty bad uptime. Unfortunately, defensively, damage reduction doesn't fully mitigate incoming damage. You'll die eventually with damage reduction unless you also have shielding or healing. And usually, once you already have shielding or healing, you don't need an additional source. And so the defensive utility is mainly useful in its ability to provide you with resistance to interruption. But the duration of the resistance to interruption is very short. Offensively, her damage numbers are pathetic, and while C1 improves them a little bit, not much. And utility-wise, if you want to use her as an elemental applicator, she's really slow. It's actually possible for her to be too slow for Molani, which it's her and Pyro MC that can ever encounter that, and that's it, basically. And if you want to use her as a Burgeon support, it's pretty slow, and the duration isn't the best. You end up with like 6-7 instances where you can trigger Burgeon over your rotation, which is not ideal. Overall, Dehya just doesn't do too much. She's a usable unit, but definitely not worth going for are like actively on the Chronicled Wish. In terms of losing your 50-50 to her though, I think you're a lot happier losing a 50-50 to her than to Tighnari, unless you're planning on going to C6 on Tighnari. Just because having a Dehya can be useful because of her, albeit kind of shitty, but she does have defensive utility and there are teams where that's usable. And her C2 increases her uptime, which is kind of useful for those teams. Next is Alhaitham. And Alhaitham's kind of a weird one. Alhaitham's not very good right now, but he's also not completely awful. His numbers are a lot better than Tighnari's numbers. He's held back by a few things. One, Quicken teams haven't really received much supports, at least on the Dendro side. Llama was actually the first real instance of support for Quicken teams that we've had pretty much since Alhaitham came out, and her kit is not intended for Quicken. It's just the fact that she has Shred makes her not awful in Quicken. So it is possible for a character like Alhaitham to see some use in the future, but really, he's not the best. That being said, he certainly is better than the next character that we will talk about, which is Wanderer. Wanderer's team DPS and his teams that are actually focused on him as a carry are closer to a pause menu than a Mawika team. They're closer to 0 than a Mawika team in his carry focused teams. Now, he can get wheelchaired. He's an animal character. He can use Fab, he can use VV. And those teams definitely do more than his carry teams do. But the reality is that Wanderer wasn't all that great on release, and he has gotten effectively no support since. He's gotten a few alternatives. He got Farina as an alternative, kind of. Inefa to some extent, I guess. But the reality is that just numbers-wise, Wanderer just doesn't cut it. He didn't really cut it back when he was released, and Natlan's power creep completely left him behind. At this point, I'd say that Wanderer is less useful to an account than a character like Charlotte. At least a character like Charlotte, if you're playing a Skirk team, you can use it to, like, against a Cryo Automaton to get through the Cryo check quickly. Wanderer has no use whatsoever on a meta-focused account. If you like Wanderer and you want to play him, I would honestly wait and pray to God that Yehoda ends up being a character that reinvigorates animal carries or some shit like that. Cross your fingers and pray to God that Varka's a support, not a carry. You need a miracle. Next is Cyno. And Cyno is kind of an interesting case because his intended design has always been Dendro teams, and Llama has given a pretty big buff to Dendro teams. But even before that, Inefa was also a nice buff to the Dendro teams that used Electro carries. Nowadays, Cyno's not even that bad. Is it Cyno doing the work in those teams? No. You could put Elisa instead and do something fairly similar with normal attack on field Lisa. But Cyno is better at it, and his design actually feels like it was intended for those types of teams. Unlike when you're playing something like Wheelchair Wanderer, where it doesn't feel like you're playing Wanderer. It feels like Wanderer is a driver. Whereas with Cyno, his design actually is intended for those Dendro teams, so it still kind of feels like you're playing Flints. Or sorry, it still kind of feels like you're playing Cyno. Now, should you get Cyno in 2025 from a Chronicled Wish? No. But if you're someone who likes Cyno, you can make him work. Out of the characters we've mentioned so far, I'd say that if you were to give me a new account that wanted one of these characters, the character I'd be happiest to see on a 50-50 loss would probably be Alhaitham, followed very closely by Dehya, then a bit of a gap, then Cyno, and then a pretty massive abyss, and at the very bottom you'd have a rotten corpse of Wanderer and Tighnari. Actually, Tighnari would be a little bit better because at least once you get enough of him, because he's a standard character, you might get more copies of him, and eventually that translates to Masterless Stella Fortuna that you can use to level 100 your characters. So I guess Tighnari's body isn't rotten yet. And then finally, we have the actual highlight of the banner. This is not a Sumeru Chronicled Wish. This is a Nilou banner with a different standard pool. Okay? Do not get it twisted. Don't let all these character icons fool you. This is a Nilou banner. In 2025, the only character that is even remotely worth thinking about actually getting for a meta reason here is Nilou. Should you get Nilou? No. But can you? You can consider it. The main reason why I'm leaning towards no in the should you get Nilou question is because for AoE focused content, Burgeon isn't that much worse than Nilou. And for Sidon Onslaught, the boss meant to shill the Nilou teams, the upcoming Bloom Crab boss, there are clears of it on Bilibili from like people on the creator server using Llama, and then the rest of the team is just 4 stars. So Nilou isn't necessary for dire difficulty of that. And then when the content is AoE, Burgeon version isn't that much better, but AoE content isn't in Siege and Onslaught, it's in Abyss. And in Abyss, things just die. Does that mean that Nilou's bad? No. Nilou is actually pretty decent now. It's just that in terms of pull value, she doesn't provide that much to your account because the content that Nilou allows you to clear with Llama is generally also clearable without Nilou. Personally, I wouldn't recommend getting Nilou, especially with the leaks we've had on Nefer's kit that indicate that Nefer is not a character that is going to be played in Nilou teams. Nilou will be a usable last slot in Nefer teams, but she won't be the best, let alone necessary. So going for her won't really change the power of your Nefer teams if you are someone who cares about Nefer. Also, in terms of just Nilou by herself, if you don't end up getting Llama, this character is not good. It's a 2-character deal. The Nilou teams are not very good without Llama. If you want Nilou, if you like Nilou, she is actually a pretty meta character now. When you look at the performance of Nilou teams, they're actually pretty good. But like I said, the main obstacle, I guess, is that because so much of the power of those Nilou teams is concentrated in Llama, it makes it so that getting Nilou doesn't actually improve your account that much. Now, Nilou is a character who is available on the Constellation Selector. That means if you get Nilou, you can get her C1 from that. Her C1 is okay. It's a nice little upgrade to her teams. But what this effectively means is that Nilou's base kit is now effectively her at C1. And instead of having 6 constellations, she has 5. And instead of C2 requiring 3 5-stars to get, it only requires 2. Nilou effectively doesn't have cons other than her C2. Her C3 is damage percent and energy. C3 and 5 are talent levels. C6 is crit. None of these things are helpful at all in Bloom teams. And because Llama only helps the Bloom part of Nilou teams, and Llama's very, very good, then the constellations after 2 are basically completely worthless now. They were never all that good. Now they're just basically worthless. So Nilou is effectively a character that only has one real constellation, and the fact that she's now on the Constellation Selector means that instead of it being her C2, it's effectively her C1. Her C1 is 35 Shred. It's alright. If you're someone who already has Nilou, or planning on getting Nilou from the Constellation Selector because you like her, and you are planning on using Nilou in Nefer teams, at C2 she will likely be the best Hydro slot, at the very least until we get Columbina. Is that worth going for just for that? No, because Columbina's probably going to be better than Nilou C2 anyways. Oh, also, I skipped a few of the signature weapons. Dehya's signature weapon is pretty okay on Dehya, but it's not that good of a stat stick, and it's not even that insane on Dehya. Don't bother. Alhaitham Sig, pretty good on him. It's better than his early cons, but that's not because his weapon is good. That's because his early cons are complete dog shit. Alhaitham's not a character that does that big of a portion of the team DPS. Generally, the damage is split between multiple characters on your team, so getting a Sig for him isn't that useful. Wanderer's Sig is pretty good for him, but there are alternatives. He can use the Sigs from other characters, like Risley's Sig, pretty well. So getting his Sig, because his Sig is less versatile. Cyno's Sig, it's pretty alright on him. It's also one of the weapons that's actually a pretty decent stat stick on a bunch of characters. So if you end up going for one of these characters' Sig, Cyno's Sig is probably the one you're the happiest seeing when you, like, as a 50-50 loss target. Either that or Nilou's Sig. I think people tend to overestimate the impact that Key has. It is a good weapon, but it's not as good as current, like, early cons or signature weapons are on the recent carries. It's a nice little upgrade for the Nilou teams. It's actually worse than it used to be because a few of the things that changed in Nilou teams from 6.0 are things that scale additively with additional EM, which means the additional EM you get from Key, percentage-wise, it's a lower increase in Llama teams than it was pre-6.0. Also, Nullcry Craftable gives you HP. There's also Doghand's Assistant, but it's mainly the Nullcry Craftable. The fact that the Nullcry Craftable gives you HP means that you now have a better free-to-play alternative to Key, so the gap is also a bit lower because of that. Quick additional yap on the 4-stars on the banner. Weapons. Zyphos is overrated and bad. Both Wandering Evenstar and Makara Aquamarine are okay, but neither of them is that useful. They're whatever. They're okay, but they're not nearly as appealing as Fav. For the characters, the pool is actually fairly small. There are not that many Sumeru 4-stars. Sethos, Kave, Farazan, Lila, Candace, Dori, Kole, that's 7. You can't lose a 50-50 on this one though. When there's raid up characters, There's 3 of them, but it's a 50-50 with a guaranteed if you lose on the next one, which means that 2/3 of your character will be your rate-up characters. So if you're looking for a specific one, you will get it 22% of the time. Here, because there's 7, 14% of your 4 stars are going to be a given one. So if you're looking for any of these specifically, it's not quite as good as if they were rate up. Because the pool is so small, it's not that much worse. So if you're looking for more than one of them, if you're someone who's just a collector and didn't pull for too many 5 stars in Sumeru, so you don't have high cons on a bunch of these, I guess you're pretty happy with this. If you're a Shao player who still doesn't have Farazan, C6, it's nice that Farazan's there. As a general rule, the only characters who really matter here are Farazan and Candace. Maybe Layla to some extent, though her constellations aren't really too important. So it's mainly Farazan and Candace who are characters that actually see play in meta teams and have constellations that are relevant. The lineup is okay. It's not great, but it's not awful either. Generally, the fact that there's no specific rate-up characters means that it's harder for the pool to be good enough to justify it, because as a general rule, there's just more bad 4 stars than good ones. That doesn't mean that the good 4 stars aren't good, but the 4-star pools are diluted with a lot of garbage. So pretty much any region is going to have a bunch of garbage, which means generally the 4-star lineup on a Chronicled Wish will be worse than a decent lineup for the rate up 4 stars. This is, I would say, equivalent to the average, maybe even slightly better than the average 4-star lineup on a rate up banner. So it's all right. Anyways, overall, this banner is honestly not that bad compared to previous Chronicled Wish banners. The reality, though, is that the characters they put on Chronicled Wish are generally not the characters that are very good. If you look at past Chronicled Wish banners, they haven't been very good. And I'd say that Nilou is actually an outlier and is a much more interesting character to be on a banner like this than any character we've had previously, including Kazuha. I think that there is actually a reason to go on this Chronicled Wish for people who like Nilou, and I don't think that was the case for any of the previous ones. Keep in mind, I'm talking from a meta perspective. If you're someone who likes a character enough that you'll play them whether they're meta or not, then don't listen to me, man. But if you're someone who wants to play strong teams, but when it comes to choosing between the strong teams, wants to play a character they like, that's basically who I'm talking to here. Nilou is strong enough that she can be one of those options, and so if that's you, you can consider going for this banner. I would be careful. Content is going to be designed around Loma for a little bit. When it stops being designed around Loma, Nilou might start becoming worse again. Power creep might also just leave her in the dust. We already know that Nefer is not really gonna be in Nilou teams, and Nefer competes with the same support that's pretty much necessary for Nilou teams. Pretty much anything that makes Nilou even remotely viable is just Llama being really good. And so, are you willing to spend enough wishes to get 2 limited 5 stars to enable your Nilou team? Or would you prefer holding out for something else? That's up to you. There's also the fact that from the recent leaks we've had, the more thorough leaks on Nefer's kit we've had, it does not seem like Nefer is a character that is going to scale too well in AoE. She's not a character that scales in AoE the same way that Nilou is, which means there's a very real possibility that bloom-focused content in the future is not AoE content. That they have bosses that have bloom checks that are entirely single target. So that's a potential worry to have for Nilou. All in all, like I said, character banner, honestly not even that bad because of Nilou. If you want Nilou, you can consider the lineup to lose your 50-50 to. Not great, but honestly could be worse. Alright, there's only 2 real, like, completely characters. Most likely, there's 3 characters you're just gonna not level up. Alright, Wanderer, Cyno, Tighnari, you probably only level up if you really like them. Alhaitham, Dehya, you could both find, like, you could find a use for either of them in meta scenarios. For weapons, Key is pretty good for Nilou teams. It's not insane, but it's alright. I'd say because we're now getting C1 for free, I would much rather choose Nilou's C2 over Key, but getting the key is pretty alright. It's also a weapon that can be used as a stat stick on other characters. Salve Scarlet Sands is pretty alright. Can also be used as a stat stick. Then Bacon is an okay stat stick. The others are like, not the best stat sticks. Anyways, as usual, hope you enjoyed, hope you learned a thing or two. This banner is better than the previous Chronicled Wishes, but still a Chronicled Wish. So keep that in mind. Don't spend money on this shit game, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye, YouTube.